An expedition team was exploring the deepest cave in the world, but just after they reached the 2,000-meter deep bottom, a massive flood triggered by torrential rain came rushing violently into the cave. As the rapidly rising water threatened to completely fill the cavern, one of the members at the rear was instantly swept into a whirlpool, and his fate became unknown. Just 1 year later, another explorer who refused to believe the danger secretly climbed down into the cave as well. But when people finally found him again, he was already a corpse hanging from a rope. Because the cave was so deep and dangerous, the rescue team had no choice but to dismember the body before transporting it back to the surface in sections. And the reason behind his death was even more unexpected. This is the story of the Veryovkina Cave tragedy. On the border between Russia and Georgia lies the famous Caucasus Mountains. Within them is the Gagra Range, one of the sub-ranges of the Caucasus. Standing at 3,353 meters above sea level, it may not look particularly remarkable at first glance, but what many people do not know is that 4 of the deepest caves in the world are all located there. The setting of today's story is the second deepest among them, Veryovkina Cave. Its depth exceeds an astonishing 2,000 meters. To put that into perspective, it is equivalent to stacking 22 statues of Liberty or 6 Eiffel Towers on top of one another. In addition, because the cave entrance sits at an elevation of 2,285 meters, explorers must first climb deep into the mountains before they can even locate the narrow, unremarkable entrance, which is only a little over 3 meters wide. The discovery of the cave itself was completely accidental. In 1968, a group of Soviet explorers first discovered the entrance. Following the tunnel on the right side, they descended to a depth of 115 meters before reaching a dead end and returning to the surface. As a result, the cave was initially named S-15. In 1983, the Veryovkina Cave expedition team from Moscow discovered a new passage on the left side. Over the next 3 years, the team carried out multiple expeditions and pushed the explored depth to 427 meters before once again being forced to turn back. During that period, the cave was renamed Veryovkina in honor of Soviet explorer and diver Alexander Veryovkin. However, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and other related difficulties, exploration efforts were suspended. It was not until the year 2000 that expeditions resumed. In August 2015, the Veryovkina team discovered a new vertical shaft on the right side of the cave. Although they did not have enough rope to continue deeper at the time, the discovery laid the foundation for future breakthroughs. From June to October of 2016, the expedition team extended exploration from 630 meters all the way down to 1,350 meters, yet there was still no sign of the cave bottom. Over the following 2 years, the Veryovkina team launched 3 more expeditions. During the process, they not only mapped a vast winding horizontal tunnel system more than 2,100 meters underground, but also discovered an ancient subterranean lake at the bottom of the cave. Eventually, they measured the cave's depth at an incredible 2,212 meters, breaking the world record at the time and surpassing the nearby Veryovkina Cave, located in the same mountain range. Veryovkina officially became the deepest cave in the world. In September of the same year, an 11-person team led by Veryovkina captain Pavel descended into the cave once again. Alongside the Veryovkina members were 2 British cave photographers, Robbie Schoen and Jeff Wade. Their mission was to explore new passages and collect biological samples from inside the cave for analysis. The expedition was expected to last around 2 weeks. In a normal cave, explorers might complete a round trip in a single day. But a cave as deep as Veryovkina was an entirely different challenge. Not only were the passages extremely narrow, but many areas were wet and muddy. Explorers had to constantly watch their footing. One wrong step could leave them with no chance of rescue. Because of this, the cave had already developed a camp system similar to those used on Mount Everest expeditions. 5 camps were established hundreds of meters apart. Besides storing supplies and providing resting areas, communication cables had also been laid between each camp. Even so, traveling from Camp 1 to the bottom of the cave still required at least 4 days and 8 hours. After preparing all their equipment, the 11 team members confidently arrived at the cave entrance. Putting on their headlamps, harnesses, and helmets, they descended into the darkness. Using ropes, they carefully lowered themselves deeper and deeper through shafts hundreds of meters deep, while constantly watching out for falling rocks overhead. They then squeezed through a series of tunnels so tight they could barely breathe. But for the experienced Veryovkina team, everything initially seemed under control. Even while guiding the 2 photographers, the group managed to reach Camp 3 in just 2 days. However, as the depth increased, the difficulty grew steadily worse. By then, the temperature inside the cave was already close to freezing. Between camps 3 and 4 were several siphon passages, U-shaped tunnels completely filled with water. Explorers had to crawl through mud and water-clogged siphons while holding their breath, squeezing both themselves and their heavy equipment through twisted cracks. If someone became trapped along the way, the consequences would be unimaginable. After 4 grueling days, the team finally arrived at Camp 5, located 2,100 meters meters underground on a flat, sandy area. During this time, photographer Robbie collected samples of invertebrates and took photographs. For the next 3 days, the team continued moving through the horizontal tunnels at the bottom of the cave toward an underground lake located far to the right side. In some incredibly narrow areas, the members could only drag their equipment sideways through cracks in the rock. When they finally reached the end, everyone was stunned by what they saw. At the bottom of the pitch-black limestone cave lay a turquoise underground lake hidden in the darkness. It measured 15 meters long, 7 meters wide, and 8.5 meters deep. Illuminated by their headlamps, the lake looked absolutely breathtaking, yet none of them realized that disaster was already approaching overhead. On the 7th day inside the cave, 2 members left early in order to catch a flight home. While passing Camp 3 on their way out, they discovered enormous amounts of floodwater violently pouring into the cave. They immediately used the communication cable to warn the team below. At first, the group at Camp 5, who were making breakfast at the time, did not panic too much. Rain outside often caused stronger water flow inside the cave, which was considered normal. Besides, Camp 5 sat at a depth of 2,100 meters, right beside a vertical shaft, while the cave's total depth exceeded 2,200 meters. That meant floodwater would first have to fill a 100-meter deep shaft before reaching them, so they believed they were still safe for the moment. But about half an hour later, the roar of the flood became deafening, as though the entire cave were shaking. Filled with concern, Robbie looked around and noticed the camp itself was still dry, while the others calmly waited for the water to subside. But 2 hours later, the flood showed no signs of weakening. After checking the water level, they realized it was almost about to surge into the camp itself. At that moment, everyone understood they could not wait any longer. Otherwise, they would all drown underground. Because of the emergency, everyone hurriedly put on their gear. To avoid slowing the group down, Robbie decided to abandon camera equipment worth tens of thousands of dollars, taking only the memory cards sealed inside waterproof bags. After saying goodbye to the others, Robbie and Jeff crossed the shaft first and reached the ropes. Looking upward, Robbie saw raging torrents crashing down like waterfalls. He clipped his ascender onto the rope, took a deep breath, and began climbing for his life. The violent floodwaters slammed into both men. They could only lower their heads and breathe through tiny gaps beneath their helmets. But after climbing the wall and squeezing through a narrow crack, the sight ahead made Robbie's heart sink instantly. The next shaft was even narrower, and the current was even stronger, nearly filling the entire space with raging water. But Robbie had no choice. He was leading the group. If he stopped, everyone behind him would die waiting. Gripping the white rope tightly once again, he gasped for air while forcing his ascender upward inch by inch against the torrent. He continued squeezing through passages and climbing higher. The entire experience felt like a nightmare. Battered by floodwaters, crushed by rocks, consumed by darkness. Even after escaping the flood zone and reaching dry areas, survival instinct still pushed him forward without pause. Only when Jeff shouted his name from behind did Robbie realize the floodwaters had changed direction farther up the cave. After Jeff caught up, the 2 men safely returned to Camp 4 at a depth of 1,900 meters. But there was no feeling of relief. The thunderous roar of the flood still echoed behind them, and the fate of the Perovo members below remained unknown. Moments later, a beam of light climbed up the rope. It was their teammate, Andrei Chiznikov. 15 minutes later, Captain Pavel led the remaining team members back into Camp 4 one by one. Only then did everyone learn what had happened. During the escape, the shaft beside Camp 5 had completely filled with water. While bringing up the rear, Captain Pavel had been swept into a massive whirlpool, spinning violently inside the shaft like someone flushed into a gigantic toilet. He fought desperately against the floodwaters and was incredibly fortunate to finally grab onto a rope. Even under those conditions, one team member still managed to carry a stove and 4 sleeping bags during the escape. Robbie was astonished by their strength and felt deeply grateful. If he and Jeff had been the ones bringing up the rear, they likely would not have survived. The team remained inside Camp 4 for another 16 hours before the roar of the flood finally began to weaken. Only after returning to the surface did they learn the flood had been caused by a full week of heavy rain. After the waters receded, Captain Pavel returned to the cave and recovered Robbie's camera. Although the equipment itself was completely destroyed, all the photographs had survived. But only a few years later, another major tragedy struck Veryovkina Cave. On August 4, 2021, the Perovo team planned another descent into the cave. But when they arrived at the entrance, they noticed signs suggesting that someone had secretly entered the cave without permission. After descending inside, the team discovered a backpack at the bottom of the entrance shaft containing moldy chocolate, brand new crampons, and trekking poles. Supplies previously stored at Camp 1 had also clearly been heavily used. This further confirmed the team's suspicions. Shortly after passing Camp 2, at a depth of 1,100 meters, they discovered an unidentified body. The deceased was hanging from a safety rope, dressed in camouflage clothing and mountaineering boots. He was using 2 ascenders but had no foot loop. His body hung only about 3 meters above the bottom of a rock ledge. Based on the condition of the remains, the man had likely been dead for more than a year. The team later found a bag on a ledge below containing 2 cell phones and a multi-tool. That same day, the expedition immediately informed the authorities. After enduring exhaustion and hypothermia, Sergei lost his life inside the cave. After securing ropes at the entrance, Sergei used descenders to move deeper underground and soon reached Camp 1 successfully. Without permission, he used food, gas, and other supplies stored there by the Perovo team. Judging from the condition of the toilet area, Sergei had likely lived there for about a week. Perhaps because the camp still had plenty of resources and the exploration had gone relatively smoothly so far, he chose not to turn back. Instead, he continued descending toward Camp 2. But as the depth increased, the near-freezing temperatures and slippery cave walls constantly tested him. After finally reaching Camp 2, he discovered it completely empty. To make matters worse, it remains unclear whether Sergei had forgotten his foot loop back at Camp 1 or had never brought one at all. With only ascenders in his hands and no footholds to support himself, climbing back upward became nearly impossible. Left with no other choice, Sergei continued descending deeper, hoping to find supplies or equipment at the lower camps. How deep he ultimately went remains unknown. But after the Great Flood, all the camps below had already been emptied. Because Sergei had never submitted an official caving request to any organization and had even hidden his plans from his family, nobody knew he had become trapped in a hopeless situation. In the end, after enduring exhaustion and hypothermia, Sergei lost his life inside the cave. Afterward, his mother requested that authorities bring her son's body back to the surface.